this stuff is going to kind of continue on our trek here, looking at rents. So we actually started Chapter 6 last time when we did the video. I guess you weren't here, Michael, but we started Chapter 6 last time with that land rent video, thinking about how things derive their value. So what gives us land value? Adam, what gives us land value? What do you think adds value to land?
No idea.
So land in Iowa runs about, it's probably up to $6,000 an acre. A lot of land in Kansas might be $4,000. What do you think drives the value of an acre of farmland? What goes on the farm? What do farmers do?
Plant stuff.
Like what kind of stuff?
Available.
So
use.
what would make corn farmers in Iowa pay more than corn farmers in Kansas for a 100-acre farm? What would be the one thing that would cause them to want to pay $5,000 in Iowa versus only $3,000 in Kansas? Usefulness? Let me hit Adam here. I want to keep his line of thought tracking. Get him engaged.
Not really worried about it, so
Well,
I didn't even get not much into the farming business.
okay. All right. So, what else could be grown? Is that what you said, Adam?
I didn't say anything like that. If that'll work as an answer.
All right. Well, if you need to leave, that's fine. You're on your own time. It's either participate in what I'm going over, or you can take off. It's voluntary to be here if you think you need to focus.
I don't know what farmers would do with soil in Iowa versus Kansas.
So then that's what I'm trying to have you think through here. So we got 100 acres of land, and we observe that farmers are paying $5,000 there. Let's say that they don't care about living in Kansas versus Iowa. They're both pretty flat places. What would cause farmers to be willing to pay more per acre in Iowa versus Kansas if they're in the business of growing corn? Both of them are in the corn business. The prices are global across the nation. So the market is, they're kind of price takers. If in the Chicago Board of Trade they come up with they get $5 a bushel, so that's pretty well set. Good comment though. There could be differences in the consumer. What's going on, Colby?
Could be more like uses, but also like companies that we work for, like
Okay.
like transportation and stuff like that. Maybe.
Okay, yeah, there could be other circumstances that people are close to freeway or transportation costs. Katie?
Less competition.
Um,
More than one?
Because of the price taking, because the market is set nationally for corn prices, the other farmers don't really care about the competition. You see what I mean? Because they're price takers. So our model of perfect competition has corn priced at $5. You produce 3 bushels of corn, you produce 3,000 bushels of corn, you get $5 a bushel. So you're a price taker. Michael?
Can I get this awkwardness over?
Sure.
And just repeat what you already said. Which
Okay.
was the availability to do other things on that piece of land.
That can factor in, but what if the land is mostly in for corn? That's not the full answer. That's part of an answer.
No.
Kate?
Is the quality better now?
Yeah. What about the quality? What does quality get you in the farming industry? What's that, Chelsea?
Better quality crops.
Better quality crops, better yield. So quality in the sense of quantity. Right? So you heard of it being a bumper crop this year. So what farmers measure is how much corn you get per acre, which is dependent upon what type of stuff. What does Some stuff under the farmer's control, some stuff not under the farmer's control. So let's think about growing. Climate, soil conditions, the amount of nutrients in the soil,
fertilizer,
weather, wind, all these things. Some, again, under the farmer's control, some not under the farmer's control. So all of that stuff tends to drive the price, but the productivity of the land is kind of the key part that drives a lot of that. We're going to see that throughout the whole semester. Part of what drives the land, whether you're manufacturing, whether you're farming, whether you're an office place, is what you can do with it. In some cases, it might be what else you can do with it, but what you can do with it. Colby?
Is there like different laws, like on ways you can like fertilize your crops, like
Yeah.
Is there?
On the amount of chemicals and stuff?
Right, stuff like that. I don't know if that would have an effect.
It can, and so the part of it would be maybe a legal amount of chemicals or a legal chemical period that you allowed to put on. But there might be legal quantities before you start contaminating groundwater, or there's issues there. So there's regulations on that. And farmers have to make the choice of how much they'll put on. So farmers in an area where the soil's not as good have to put on more of those chemicals than farmers that are in a richer soil area. Yep, good point. Okay. This chapter brings up a couple different issues, and it mostly sticks with the payment per month, the rent. We can also think of buying land. So the market value, so pay, I guess, attention here to the value of the land in terms of the price that it commands versus the land rent. Most of what we're thinking about is how much the flow variable is in terms of the rental payment that you have to make on the land. And ultimately, if you have more fertile land, you're going to be willing to pay more rent for that land, right? So that's the trade-offs in terms of the price. So for the most part in this chapter, the price of the resources are expressed in terms of rent. So what would that farmland look like? Willingness to pay for an acre. I'm just kind of keeping in tune with the book here. Everywhere else around the world is in meter on the metric system, so it's a hectare rather than an acre. So a hectare of land, what is our willingness to pay? Why is it this leftover business? Wouldn't we want to pay less than that?
Well, because there's no economic profit.
Okay, what about the profit? Good.
There's no economic profit.
And is that okay?
I mean, they still make a profit.
They still make a profit. So that's back to our axiom, one of our axioms on zero profits, right?
Non-land costs include opportunity costs.
Yes, absolutely. So this willingness to pay, don't forget that that's like the maximum amount they're willing to pay. They might not actually be paying that, but what we're trying to construct is ultimately a demand curve. And so what is their willingness to pay for a hectare of land? Well, let's look at what the leftovers are to try to construct that amount. So in thinking about it that way, we get the quantity produced. Here's our bumper crop. So the high quality soil, low quality soil, and revenue is double with double the production on a given acre. And then that drives the price of the land as kind of this leftover. If you're a landowner, you can kind of think, well, I'd like to charge as high a rent as possible, but if I charge too high a rent, nobody's going to rent my land. I get nothing, right? So if we kind of put our land speculator hat on, they're kind of fishing around on what the highest price they could charge. Meanwhile, the farmer is thinking about the best price that they can find on land. And so that we go through that competitive process. This one I just wanted to highlight too on the lot size. So we often talk about a 100-acre farm, a 1,000-acre farm, or whatever that land is. Our willingness to pay divided by the lot size gives us our bid rent. So the bid rent is the rent per hectare. All right. So, shift gears to manufacturing. This is Colby. You can jump in on this one. What drives the price of land if driving is a significant cost to your business?
Is that just something like easier ways of transportation?
Okay. And what would make it easier? Anybody?
If you had better like freeways and like roads and stuff to get to and from like your farmland.
Okay.
With like your crops and stuff.
So that would help if, as you're maybe shopping cities, right? This one's got a good system, this one doesn't.
Right.
What about when you're within a city and the prices that you find around the city? What's going to drive that part of the land price in that? If we're on the east side of the city, and we've got a lot here and a lot here and a lot here, what's going to maybe drive the lot price? Those prices can be different, but if we're in the manufacturing setup where driving is a large part of our business, what is it going to be if the highway is here?
Distance from the highway.
Yeah, distance. So on top of the quality of the road, just sheer distance is going to save us a lot. If this is a 1 mile trip from this lot, and this is 5 miles, and this is 10 miles to get to the highway, then we're going to see this lot be more valuable, right? So we got this transportation issue in terms of cost, which could be in terms of mileage. So what's our willingness to pay based on distance? The farther we are, the more our freight cost runs, the more gasoline, the more travel expense. If we take that leftover concept then on what we're going to be able to pay for a 2 hectare site, it's going to go down. The further we are, is the most we can pay is different. So we've got prices adjusting according to distance from this primary source, primary access that needs to be used. Max, you look like you got a question brewing.
Well, I'm just trying to figure out whether you're getting the numbers for the bid rent.
Okay.
I mean, that's total revenue minus non-land costs, so you're starting with 250.
So the willingness to pay is the leftover amount, right? So 250 worth of revenue, non-land costs, no freight costs because we're close to the freeway. So I got 120 bucks price tag, but it's a 2 acre site or a 2 hectare site.
Okay.
So per
Divide by
hectare,
2, got it.
yeah, that kind of helps normalize us. It's not as big a deal on a table like this, but if we were looking at the size of sites and maybe collecting some actual data, and this was a 4 acre site, and this was a 2, and this was 16 or something, we might want to do that division so that we get it on a per acre basis or per hectare basis. Okay, anything else? All right. So the bid rent function ends up being our demand curve. So nothing too special here, except for I wanted to point out the horizontal distance, that the amount we're willing to pay per hectare is dependent upon the distance we are at. And the greater the distance, the less we're willing to pay. Makes sense. So then we got the downward sloping demand curve. Our willingness to pay as a business is dependent upon taking into account all factors of production. Distance to the highway is just kind of a weird new factor of production that we have on top of whatever our other costs were. All right, so that is how those prices are adjusting. If you're a business, and we got this leftover concept going, how can you keep the landlord that owns the land? So kind of think of a land lease here, but how does the business keep the landlord from capturing the economic profits that are greater than zero? We know that we got to keep them in business and keep them at zero, but our firm is still a profit maximizer. How do we keep in the rental commercial real estate deal? I tell you what, I've got a similar situation on a building we redeveloped in downtown Ames, and there's a bar owner that I worked with there, and we had kind of a split thing on the improvements that he did to the building. So we as building owners put in a substantial amount of money into the infrastructure, into the shell. It was an old building in a downtown, kind of similar to Ottawa Main Street. It was Ames Main Street, and we had to reinforce the building in the foundation. We had to do tuck pointing on the outside where the bricks were starting to fall out, and we had to do stuff like that to kind of get a shell. And then the business who's moving in there did all the finishes. So they built a brand new bar, they added coolers, brought in capital equipment like the grill, redid the bathrooms with their own finishes. They used tile in places. Redid the floors. I think they put up they refinished part of the tin ceiling. I think they just repainted it. New light fixtures, improved the space so that when you walk into the restaurant, what you see, what the consumer sees is what they built, not what we built. We built things that are kind of hidden and tucked away. So his business is doing pretty good. How does he keep the landlord from capturing his business that he put together that's turned out to be pretty profitable?
Can he devise a system or something where all of the money that he spent on his improvements, he keeps the profits from that until they equal zero, and then he has to pay the landlord?
That would be one way to kind of set something up. Okay. So maybe something creative on how the improvement costs were shared.
I don't know if this is the lesser of two evils, but if you introduce competition to the point where you are earning economic profit, can he not earn economic profit then?
What's going to happen over time?
Zero.
Why?
Competition.
Okay, good, competition. So as this area starts to get prosperous, is it possible for that to be the new hot spot in downtown? And there's lots of new restaurant bar areas. You guys have heard of some of these areas popping up, right? And so maybe there's some agglomeration going on to where all the restaurant bars in this particular area are prospering. They can charge pretty good prices. They're all making a decent amount of profit. What keeps the landlord from just jacking up the rent and essentially capturing contracts? That's what I was looking for. Good.
It's not a ceiling, but it's called, there's something they put in place where you can't, it's fixed. As time goes by, you can't increase it.
Yep. So a lot of long-term contracts, so it's a long-term lease generally is what goes on in this type of setting. And this is exactly why. So this guy, back to my real story, we're going to go to court at some point here this year. It was supposed to happen already, but something happened. So we're suing him because he didn't pay what we thought was negotiated into the rent. So there was this extra $1,000 amount for the upstairs spot that was a potential space to move into. And he claims that he chose not to take that vacant space. At the time when we were negotiating, it was a possibility that, you know, we wanted somebody to take the whole space. It's basically traditional Ottawa Main Street, first floor, second floor. Oh crap, what do I do with the second floor? I can redevelop it, but second floor space doesn't lease as good as the first floor space. So our strategy was to get one tenant to take both upstairs and downstairs. And so hasn't been paying the $1,000 a month rent upstairs. In the renewals, which is what you were getting at, Max, so he has a 6.5-year lease. I can't remember why it's a weird term, but let's just call it 7-year lease. There's an option to renew, but we didn't put any thing in there of a cap on what the amount could go up. So now that he's screwed us for $1,000 a month on this, depending on how this lawsuit goes up, and he's doing well, so he's established that this is a hot spot, right? Through his stuff that he put in there. Normally, if we had a good relationship with the tenant, we wouldn't just go in and try to capture that amount. But since we have a clause on the renewal that doesn't specify a max increase in the rent amount, we're just going to jack it up and recapture what we thought was right, regardless of how the lawsuit turns out, if he happens to weasel out of it. So long-term leases, whether it's in commercial land, there's such thing as 99-year leases. By law, they can't be over 100. So there's 99-year leases on land. But that's how businesses are able to kind of protect themselves, is through these long-term contracts. So as we read through this leftover stuff, that's not necessarily, it's possible. You need to be aware of that, because if you just sign a 1-year lease, boom, next year rents are going up. Oh, you're pretty successful. I think you could absorb a 10% increase in rent.
Why did we not call you on that? I mean, that's the first thing I would have said is, whoa, like, if I do well, you know what I'm saying? Do you not read that part of the contract?